Now just quickly, before we jump into today's video, I just want to say a massive thank you for 100,000 subscribers, and a particular thank you to YouTube themselves, who celebrated by age restricting my last video. Nah, in all seriousness, this has been the dream for a long time, so thank you so much to all of your support over the years. I've dropped some 100k merch on my website to celebrate, and it'll only be up there till the 8th of November. So if you'd like to get a bit of channel history and support me further, I'll leave that link down in the description below. Now onto the comedy review for the Brazilian Grand Prix. Round 21 of the season would see the sport trade one classic circuit for another, as the F1 circus travelled from Mexico to Brazil and picked up some rather interesting rumours along the way. Albert Fabrega would release this tweet on the run-up to the weekend, promptly causing Twitter to lose their f***ing minds. Was Aston Martin going under? Was Alonso heading to Red Bull? Had Valtteri Bottas got his dick out in the middle of the paddock and proceeded to whirl it around whilst making helicopter noises that confused onlookers? Okay, I made that last one up, but you can see it now, can't you? In the end, it turned out there was no rumour, and if there was, it was nowhere near as interesting as Bottas's chopper here. Either way, the speculation of Fernando jumping ship seemed to severely piss off the Spaniard, claiming there will be consequences. And now it seems like he was the one spreading the rumours himself. In other real news, the Brazilian Grand Prix would mark the final sprint event on the 2023 schedule. Yet sadly not the final time fans and pundits alike would castrate the format on social media. Teams like Mercedes were even open to the idea of reverse grids, which is a complete 180 compared to their stance on it when the sprint weekends were first introduced back in 2021. I wonder what might have brought that on. And finally, in rare good news, heading into the Brazilian Grand Prix weekend, the sport announced a new deal that would see Interlagos remain on the calendar until 2030. A relieving development given only a few years ago F1 wanted to ditch the iconic venue for another cookie-cutter circuit in the heart of Rio, with about as much character as Lance Stroll's personality. The sprint weekend meant just a singular practice session before the Grand Prix qualifying kicked off on Friday evening. To everyone's surprise, that FP1 session wasn't topped by Max Verstappen, as instead it was Carlos Sainz and Ferrari who entered the hour P1. In a session that, I won't lie, didn't have that many talking points. Drive to Survive, I'm sure, will milk the ever-living out of this clash between Norris and Hulkenberg, the pair giving Specsavers their first of several adverts this weekend. Mercedes, though, seem to have got off on the front foot, with last year's race winner George Russell ending the session third. Even the F1 highlights package were tipping the Silver Arrows as Red Bull's closest challengers. I'm sure that won't age badly whatsoever. On to qualifying then, and the first shock would be Logan Sargent doing a lap that, at the time, was good enough to see him progress to Q2. Reality would soon kick in, however, as Haas pulled two great laps out the bag to put the American back where he belongs. Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo, after a great showing at Mexico City, would also find themselves in the drop zone at the end of Q1, and I've decided I'm just going to adopt the policy I took before last weekend and refuse to talk about it. Despite the strong pace in Q1, Haas would return to being remarkably mid in the second part of qualifying, joining Albon and the two Alpines in the drop zone as the 10 remaining cars carried on into the top 10 shootout for pole. There really hadn't been much to talk about so far, though Q3 would soon change that. With rain on the way, the 10 drivers were quick to get out there and put a benchmark time on the board. Oscar Piastri was also quick to throw away said chance as he took the Raikkonen line into Junsao in a move that only ruined Sergio Perez's lap, though let's be honest, he would have finished 9th anyway. At the front, it was no surprise that Max Verstappen was quickest, from Charles Leclerc and Lance Stroll. Wait, what? You know, I was so used to seeing Lance go out in Q1, I hadn't even realised he'd made it into the top 10 until this moment. And whilst normally we'd see everyone go out again for another run, the racing gods turned off the sun and made sure that wasn't going to happen. With a change in climactic conditions bringing out a red flag, this was the end of the on-track action, but not the end of the drama. The high winds and torrential rain would do a number on the facilities inside the circuit, with the grandstands destroyed and track photographers almost getting decapitated by falling debris. I mean, can you imagine that as a way to go? The last thing you see being a Logan Sargent advertising board. Just kidding, they don't exist. I could make a whole video joking about this, but I'd just like to highlight one reply from one of the photographers who nearly didn't make it. The sad part here is that it's scarily accurate for what Formula 1 would do. Anyway, the grandstand striptease wouldn't deter everyone rocking up on a much drier Saturday morning and doing it all again for the sprint shootout. We were very much back to normal now, which was confirmed when Lance was 17th in SQ1. The other Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso was in a bit of bother too, as a wild Esteban Ocon appeared and wiped the Spaniard out at turn 2, before going on to claim that this was all Fernando's fault. Looks like Ocon lost his brain as well as his back end on that curb back there. The crash delay proceedings and even one of Fernando's engineers giving his car a blowjob wasn't enough to coax the Aston back into life in time for SQ2. There were no major shocks in the drop zone here, so let's just move on. SQ3 saw us all expecting yet another Verstappen masterclass for pole, though that's not quite what happened. The first seeds of doubt were sown when the Dutchman was beaten by both Perez and the McLaren of Norris at the end of the second session, and when the Briton did so again, we all started to wake up and actually pay attention for once. All hope for a Red Bull pole now lied with Sergio Perez, which is a joke in itself, and the Mexican was third. With no one else able to usurp Lando's time, the number 4 car would start in pole position for the sprint that afternoon, and given the last 4 sprint events have all been won from P1, that sets up some pretty good odds for Norris to take his first victory in Formula 1. Then again, this is Lando Norris, so guess who got overtaken into the first corner? That's the last we'll see of Verstappen as he shot down the road for an easy victory. Thankfully, the Brazilian Grand Prix circuit wasn't designed by this pleb, and thus, further down the road, we actually got some good overtaking for once. #Blessed made a move around the outside of Perez, whilst George Russell made himself responsible for several Lando fan suicides as he sent the Briton from first to third by the end of the opening lap. Maybe Mercedes had the pace to challenge for the lead now. Just kidding. This was just a precursor to them being utterly dog shit for the rest of the weekend. Perez got past Hamilton on lap 4 in a move that almost allowed the Ferrari terrorist down the inside of the Mercedes, though given we were now past turn 1, everyone survived and we could move on with our day. 1 lap later and the other Mercedes was being repassed, this time by Lando Norris, who now went on to take the fight to the air 1 second back from Max Verstappen. As George continued to fall further into the abyss, Daniel Ricciardo was busy making moves on the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, diving round the outside of turn 1, though compromising his line and allowing the smooth operator to get back past on the run down to turn 4. This approach wasn't working, and Daniel would need to try something different if he wanted to get past the Scuderia in front. This was clear to everyone except Daniel Ricciardo, who did the exact same thing, only to end up losing out to Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. Just behind this battle was Fernando Alonso. He was busy trying to get past an Alpine without finding the barrier, and since that Alpine wasn't Esteban Ocon, this was able to happen whilst putting on a mega show for the fans in the process. With that done, let's return to the Mercedes struggle bus, as Hamilton was now behind Charles Leclerc and being pressured by the AlphaTauri of Yuki Tsunoda of all things. Thankfully for Lewis, Yuki was still experiencing post-traumatic Piastri disorder from Mexico, and the Merc was able to hold on for a decent P6 finish given the circumstances. Yuki got in 1 lap later. There were no worries for Max Verstappen, however. He crossed the line to take the sprint win from Norris and Perez, who got into the top 3 for the first time since Monza, which just shows you how diabolically bad his season has become. So, would we get a repeat on Sunday? Or maybe Charles would make things interesting and forget to turn left at the first corner. Or maybe he wouldn't even make it that far. Leclerc lost something, some say hydraulics, others say talent, as he spun into the barriers on the formation lap. When we got going, we wouldn't get going for very long. Verstappen flew away as expected, but Alex Albon was a man on a mission, said mission being to assassinate as many Haas drivers as he can in 1 corner. With cars strewn all over the turn 1 runoff and Charles Leclerc lost in no man's land, we had a red flag, and as we prepared to get going again, we found a flip of the front row for the sprint. We'd then get a repeat of that Saturday start, in that Verstappen got a great getaway and Norris got away like a f***ing tractor. Unlike normal, however, Norris was able to hold on to the diffuser of the Red Bull, even making an attempt at the lead on lap 8. Verstappen, deciding that he didn't like this very much, turned on the afterburners and immediately pulled a 2-second lead. Sergio Perez was now in great form, which is a sentence I don't think I've said all year. He'd make it past both Mercedes cars come the end of lap 19, the Silver Arrows coming into the pits soon after, and given their pace at the time, might as well have just stayed there and gone home early. They did admittedly get the undercut on Checo with Hamilton, and if you're wondering where the footage of that is, the race directors deemed it would be far more interesting to focus on Lance Stroll for some reason here. On lap 24, car 24, Zhou Guanyu had to retire from the race. Anyway, Checo was back past Hamilton again with a great move at turn 4. We'll cut to midway through the Grand Prix now, since not much really happened and I fell asleep for about 10 laps. The 2 Mercedes cars were back together, with George Russell snitching on his teammate for driving too slowly, With the Silver Arrows determined to Ferrari themselves, the one remaining prancing horse of Sainz was flying, and easily breezed past both of them to get up into 6th. That would really set the trend for the next 20 laps or so, each one marked by another Team LH fan throwing themselves off the top of one of the grandstands. Eventually, the team got so embarrassed they decided just to retire George, claiming there was a risk of an imminent blow-up. The team failed to clarify whether this was Russell's engine or Toto Wolff's brain aneurysm. We've not spoken about the top 3 for a while, and that's mainly because they weren't doing very much. That was about to change though, as Sergio Perez was lining up a move on Fernando Alonso for 3rd. The Spaniard put up a stunning defensive drive, though when Sergio got past with a couple of laps to go, all looked lost for Aston Martin. That was until Perez checoed himself going through turn 1 on the final lap. That allowed Nando back by, and after a thrilling drag race to the line, snagged the final spot on the podium back by a measly 0.5 of a second. It was yet another Verstappen victory, however, in a race that had its moments, but also had a lot of sleep therapy too. There were some quality drives today, not just Fernando, but also Lance Stroll, who did really well to come home P5. You don't say that very often, do you? I really don't know where to rank this one, so let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the comedy review, be sure to drop it a like and get subscribed as we get into the closing races of the 2023 season. Don't forget to check out the 100k merch as well. After the 8th of November, it's gone for good. A final thank you, as always, goes out to all my patrons and channel members, and if you'd like to support me that way instead and get some early access to some of my content, all the links you need are down in the description below. I'll be back next week with another video, but until then, have a good one.